Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Museum of Disability. My name's Lou. I am quite comfortably recording from bed, as always. Last month we had a look at a radium dial watch painted by the Radium Girls. So feel free to check out that episode if you haven't seen it already. This month we have a little bit more social history than anything material. We have a couple of letters, and I think we're just going to get straight into it. So we have a short progression of letters. We've got 3 letters in total, and they highlight the relationship between Colette, the French writer Colette, and Claude Ferrer, and their independent experiences with arthritis throughout their lifetime. And the short series kind of culminates in a letter from Colette to Claude about her arthritis at a time when she was most disabled by it. And these two being French writers, Colette being very well known, you may have heard of her. These letters are in French. I'm not going to read them all out in full, but I am going to read excerpts, so you're going to get some lovely butchered French from me, and then I'm going to provide a translation after that. So you're going to have to struggle through some accents and pronunciations, and I apologise in advance for that. But Colette herself, she was a French author and a woman of letters. Her career began with the really popular Claudine books, which were partially, or some of the later books were inspired by her lesbian and queer affairs outside of her marriage. And Colette was probably best known for her 1944 novella called Gigi. She was also a mime, an actress, a journalist, and more recently the subject of a 2018 film starring Keira Knightley, which I would definitely recommend if you haven't seen or if you know nothing about Colette. During the last 20 years of her life, she experienced disabling arthritis, which had been set off by the fracture of her fibula in 1931, although she wasn't officially diagnosed until 1941. She spoke of her illness sometimes with a bit of humour. Je souffre jour et nuit. Je voudrais cueillir des petits pois. I suffer day and night. I want to pick peas. She sometimes spoke of it with a bit of intensity. Je souffre le martyr. I suffer like a martyr. Or arthrite de la hanche gauche. Je souffre paramétriquement. Arthritis of the left hip. I suffer as under pressure. And sometimes her frustration came through. J'ai mal derrière l'oreille et tu autour avec un gonflement. Quelle est cette nouvelle humiliation? I hurt behind the left ear and all around with swelling. What is this new humiliation? And she seemed to speak quite freely of her ailments, as we're going to see. Of her friend, she wrote, Marguerite et moi échangeons tous les matins des dialogues de rhumatisante. Every morning, Marguerite and I exchange experiences of rheumatisms. And this Marguerite is presumably the wife of Willie, who was Colette's first husband. But arthritis was not the only illness that Colette experienced in her life. She also regularly had colds, flus, gastroenteritis, and the like. She writes, Ma petite Hélène, ça y est, j'ai de la bronchite, de la trachite, des ventouses, des inhalations, des émertations, tout ce qu'on peut collectionner dans les voies respiratoires, sauf la tuberculose, bien entendu. My little Helen, that's it. I have bronchitis, tracheitis, sucking, inhaling troubles, anything you can collect in the airways, except, of course, tuberculosis. And she was never really coy in describing her illnesses, no matter how embarrassing they may have been perceived at the time. For instance, when she's diagnosed with un protésère, et un protésère tropical, s'il te plaît. A protist, and a tropical protist, if you please. She asks, Où ai-je cueilli cet animal? Where did I pick up this creature? And a bit more generally, she was always a very, very stylish woman. I mean, take a look at some of these images. Um, I mean, Colette in her suit, smoking a cigarette. I mean, she can she can pull off that look like no one else. Um, but later on, when she was more disabled, I mean, check out some of these photos of her in a wheelchair. I think, if anyone is afraid to get a wheelchair because of how they might look or how they might be perceived, I think they need to take a look at, some of Colette's photos, because look at these poses. They are unmatched, I think. And I absolutely love that she can pull off both those looks. I'm not quite sure where she looks the coolest, but um, I really love those images. Um, Claude Ferrer, on the other hand, who was one of the letters that we're going to see and the recipient of one of Colette's letters, he was born Frédéric Charles Bagon, and he was a French Navy officer and a writer. He was a traditionalist conservative and one of the members of the French Academy who supported the Vichy regime. He was a good friend of Colette's, and in 1948 he even nominated her for the Nobel Prize in Literature. To which the committee replied that the French writer is moving on a plane where she cannot seriously be considered for a Nobel Prize. And the first letter that we're going to look at is a letter from Claude to another writer called Pierre Louis. He was a poet and an author renowned for his lesbian themes in his writing. This letter was from 1908, and it was regarding Claude Ferrer's health. So as I say, I'm going to read a little excerpt in French and then provide you with the much less grating translation. Dès demain, je vous enverrai une longue lettre, et d'ici à 40 jours, je vous promets d'aller vous voir. Je vais, moi, mal. Crise d'aphorisme, eczéma au visage et le reste. Atroce. Je travaille peu. La chaleur m'accable. La vie est une sale invention. Ma mère est souffrante aussi. Toute mon affection fidèle vous suit. Tomorrow I will send you a long letter, and within 40 days I promise to come and see you. I am myself unwell, arthritic crisis, eczema on my face, and the rest. Atrocious. I work little. Heat overwhelms me. Life is a dirty invention. My mother suffers too. All my faithful affection follows you. So we can see at age 32, he was clearly already experiencing quite disabling arthritis, and this did seem to take a toll on its mental health. We will see from the final letter that as he got older, Claude seemed to dwell a little bit less on his pain, despite the fact that it probably only got worse. But the truth is, we know comparatively little about Claude's own experiences with arthritis, except what little we can see in these letters. But we're going to park it on Claude for a moment and save that for the final letter, and move straight on to our first letter from Colette, which was in 1941 when she first got diagnosed with arthritis. Remember, she'd already been dealing with it for about 10 years at this point. And in this letter, she's writing to her dear sorcerer, as she calls them, who supplied her with materials such as fuel during the shortages of the war years. And she goes on to describe the impact that the lack of heating has on her health. For example, je n'ai pas trouvé de réponse autour de moi. Mon charbon de l'année dernière fond comme sucre. Si je n'ai plus de chaleur, je ne peux plus travailler, parce que comme le père Richepin, je ne puis travailler que si j'ai chaud. Si nous avons chaud, mon arthrite longe et moi. I found no answer around me. My coal from last year melts like sugar. If I no longer have heat, I can no longer work, because, like old Richepin, I can only work if I'm warm. If we are warm, my hip arthritis and I. So you can see, in spite of the privation and crippling pain During those years, Colette maintains her, very poetic writer's language and even a bit of familiarity with this mysterious sorcerer, with whom later in the letter she goes on to allude to the black market a little bit playfully as a source of fuel. She writes, Si vous savez où je pourrais acheter du charbon pour ma petite chaudière, je sais que c'est parfaitement une question indécente, mais vous avez signé sorcière en tout genre. La bulle électrique me sauve tous les jours la vie à la pensée. Sans elle, je serais forcé de signer la gratte-papier frigorifiée. Ooh, that's a hard word. If you know where I could buy coal for my small boiler, I know this is a perfectly indecent question, but you signed sorcerer of all kinds. The electric bulb saves my life and thoughts every day. Without it, I would be forced to sign as the refrigerated scribbler. Just a fun turn of phrase, I think. The gratte-papier frigorifié, refrigerated scribbler. And this letter was just a few years before the publication of her book, The Evening Star, which was in 1946. And in that book, Colette, often stuck in bed, wrote about her reflections and memories, describing her bed comme un radeau, like a raft, among her recollections. In her present, she describes latching onto obscene phone calls in the middle of the night to stave off boredom, although they hang up too quickly, according to her. And also the joy when her friends would take her for an automobile ride around the city. And it's clear that, she was savouring the small joys wherever she could get them. And finally, we come on to the culmination of these letters, which is we have one part of a correspondence between Colette and Claude Ferrer, in which Colette, now aged 78, alludes once more to her arthritis. She writes, Je vis alité, arthrite, jambe. Je suis sortie une fois en voiture, une fois en... What's 80 in French? 80 jours. Évidemment, je préférerais ne pas souffrir ou souffrir moins, mais ma fenêtre est tournée vers le sud, sur le jardin, sur le soleil, et j'ai le droit de me plaindre. I live bedbound, arthritis, legs. I went out once in the car, once in 80 days. Clearly, I would prefer not to suffer, or to suffer less, but my window faces south, overlooking the garden, in the sun. Do I have the right to complain? I think her tone seems, markedly lighter than in her earlier letter, written, during the harsh years of the war. And this lighter tone might reflect, a bit of familiarity with her condition at this point, or maybe even the lightness of the post-war years. But it may also reflect, a level of understanding between the two correspondents that we have here. We've seen that Claude also suffered from arthritis, and Colette's attempted sort of bright side mentality in this letter could be her way of trying to avoid complaining, as it were, to a fellow sufferer, while also clearly stating to one who she knows will understand that she is indeed suffering. This is quite stark, I think, when compared to the quite open and blasé or vulnerable ways she often referred to her illnesses in other cases, as we've seen. While she might have felt the need to highlight her privation in the 1941 letter, in order to, express her need for fuel and coal, here it seems that she's attempting to find light in the common language of disability, where she's free from the need to explain her condition. I don't think this should be taken to assume that Colette was overly optimistic and positive about her arthritis, but rather as an example of the complex attitudes that disabled people might have towards their own condition, and how this can emerge in different ways depending on who they're talking with. Later on in the letter, Colette goes on to ask, Comment es-tu? Ta lettre a oublié de me le dire. Recommence-la, ce sera ta punition. How are you? Your letter forgot to tell me. Start it over. That will be your punishment. Although here we're missing Claude's half of this little conversation, we might infer that maybe his arthritis wasn't as disabling at that moment in time, or maybe he no longer, spoke of it as often, perhaps because of a lifetime of familiarity with the condition. But all in all, this short series, to me, offers a fascinating and unique insight into Colette's experiences with arthritis and how she relayed that experiences in her writings and interactions with other people. Correspondence is not just in the words of the chronically ill or disabled, but between two people with the same condition they're incredibly rare throughout history, and all these letters provide just that, as well as insight into one of the most celebrated French writers and queer historical figures of all time. These letters are a reminder that disability history is not a separate entity, but woven into the fabric of history we already know. They're a reminder that age related disabilities will go on to affect most of us at some stage in our lives, and few of us are exempt from that. Colette died just 3 years after this final letter, and while most biographies write off this period in her life to disability, this letter demonstrates a richness of character and an inner world that stayed with her until the end, not just in spite of disability, but perhaps even because of it. Well, that is the end of episode 2. I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to leave a like or a comment. The channel is still very young and still finding its audience, so any share, comment, subscription is much appreciated. And we will, of course, be back next month for episode 3. Until then, thank you. Bye bye.